Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this event, Scottish Government Hydrogen Policy Opportunities for Academic Researchers. Apologies for the little groanings there, quickly ironed out by our excellent technical team. So my name is Stephen Mark Williams. I'm the Executive Director of ETP. ETP is the Scottish Academic Research Pool in Energy. So this event is co-hosted by ETP and the Hydrogen Accelerator, and also supported by the Engineering Research Pool, SRPE, Caroline Cantley, and by ScotChem, which is the Chemistry Research Pool, Bill MacDonald. And particular welcome to the panel today. So Stuart Mackay from the Scottish Government, Veronica Noon from Scottish Enterprise, and Professor John Irvine, who's the chair of the Hydrogen Accelerator. Just to structure the event, it will be in two specific sections. So the first section, about 3/4 of an hour, will be our panel. So the three presenters will be presenting. I will MC that. You will then get an opportunity to ask those three presenters in the form of a panel questions afterwards. Okay, so there'll be no questions in between the presenters, but there will be an opportunity of an hour and a half afterwards for a Q&A session, which will be hosted by moderators Graham Cook of the University of Glasgow, who's the ETP Theme Coordinator, Energy Conversion Storage, and Jerry Agnew, who's the Director of the Hydrogen Accelerator. Now, as far as the technology is concerned today, we're using Teams, and there are two methods of communication. So the first is via the chat function. So that won't be moderated, so you feel free to just to put comments and stuff in there. If you actually want to ask a question of the panel during the panel discussion, then please put a question in the Q&A section of Teams. Okay, so that will be moderated. So the two chairs will moderate that and ask questions based on the questions that you pose in the Q&A session. Okay, so that's the way that this particular version of Teams works. So the purpose of the event essentially is to create that connection between Scottish Government and the policy in Scotland and the Scottish academic research base in hydrogen. So this is the opportunity for our academic researchers to probe policymakers on what their ambitions are over the next, obviously, well, 25 years in hydrogen. We have the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise here who will be presenting in bite-sized chunks their work around hydrogen policy. As you know, that there were two, in fact, three documents on hydrogen and wind issued by the Scottish Government just before Christmas. And Scottish Enterprise are currently working on a hydrogen action plan. So this is your opportunity to find out more about that, so that following on from this event, ETP will then be having a discussion with the Scottish Government about where we can go next, which may include setting up a hydrogen theme as part of, at the moment, as you are aware, ETP has 12 themes, and it may be that it might be appropriate for us to set up a hydrogen theme to act as a hub for hydrogen research in Scotland. And finally, before we move on to the panel, a couple of parish notices, just to let you know that ETP PhD programme will be running this year. We will expect to put out a call at the end of or beginning of March with a deadline end of May. So please put that into your diaries, run along similar lines, and we'll be hosting a launch webinar for that sometime in the middle of March. And secondly, also the Knowledge Exchange Network. Although hydrogen isn't specifically part of the Knowledge Exchange Network, it isn't a theme within that, we actually have been allowed a certain amount of funding to fund small hydrogen projects along the same lines as the KEN this year. So again, if you have any small hydrogen projects along the same lines as the KEN, so in collaboration with an SME in low carbon, then we'd be happy to hear from you. Right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Stuart Mackay, who's Head of Hydrogen Policy for the Scottish Government, and we're very happy to have him along. So Stuart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen Mark. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just get that full screen. Thank you for joining today. I know it's quite a big audience with quite a broad range of interests. What I'd like to do just now is take you through the hydrogen policy statement that the Scottish Government produced last year. And to do that and to go back in time a wee bit, we're going to take you through a bit of the work that we've done leading up to that. This is my first slide. This is also my last slide, which I'll get to, and I'll talk about that picture at the end of this presentation. So this is me. So why are we interested in hydrogen as a government? Our climate change targets, as a lot of people will know, are very challenging in Scotland and world leading. And the most challenging one here that we have is the 2030 target. So 75% reduction by 2030. Very challenging target, but also very exciting too. Because of this, we in the Scottish Government are compelled to move at a really fast pace to deliver the sort of our climate change targets. And we think that we're going to need all the tools in the box. We're going to need renewable energy, we're going to need hydrogen too. And we think hydrogen has a role to play in specific areas. And this is why we've done quite a lot of work in hydrogen in the last sort of 12, 13 months or so. We think that hydrogen can be used as an alternative to natural gas to transfer and store energy, but also to heat homes and buildings. We also think that it's got quite a good potential as a replacement for fossil fuel feedstock in the industrial side of the energy system. In transport, especially the kind of heavy end of transport, so if you think of buses and lorries and trains and ships, the kind of bigger items, and also the heavy duty vehicles, vehicles that are fleets that have really heavy duty cycles, we think that hydrogen has a role to play there as well. Potentially also for direct power production in the future. That's a wee bit further off, we think, but definitely has a role to play there. And there's a few other things too that I haven't put in here about e-fuels and things like that we can discuss in the sort of later stages of this presentation. We're taking quite a strategic approach to hydrogen. Over the past 10 years or so, the Scottish Government has supported a number of projects. Some of them you'll be aware of. Projects in Orkney, the Aberdeen buses, hydrogen production in Fife. And we're continuing with that trend of supporting these kind of demonstration scale as we go forward. But we're starting to look strategically at, what are the kind of low regrets areas of hydrogen that might adopt things in a bigger way, in a commercial way first. And as you can see in this diagram, this is from our hydrogen assessment report. There are some areas where there are low regrets. So existing hydrogen users, this is, if you think of, what happens in Grangemouth with hydrogen, quite a large hydrogen production. And that is, these are companies that understand hydrogen, understand how to make it, how to use it, how to transport it, and what to do with it. These seem to us to be quite low regret. So that kind of industrial use of hydrogen is something that we're very keen to explore. And fleet and heavy transport, as we're already doing through the Aberdeen buses and the activity at Dundee and Glasgow as well, which John Irvin will be able to talk about a bit more in his presentation, the transport side. There's still a decision to be made in heating for hydrogen, but there is significant demonstration going on, and I'll talk about that too. But there is regulatory things that need to change in order for that to come about. And it's the same case with industrial heat as well. The other kind of right-hand side of this slide is things that we see in the future that if hydrogen scales up appropriately, then the use of hydrogen for power generation and potentially personal transport too. And we're not alone in hydrogen in taking forward this kind of strategic approach. There's hydrogen projects all over the world. I'm sure that the audience today will know many more than I do, but these are some of the key ones here, the key activities. We're also looking at Europe, where there is a lot of activity in Europe, particularly Northern Europe. A lot of projects on the go, a lot of strategies being published from Germany and Spain and Portugal, and the Netherlands, you know, and the EU itself. So a lot of activity. This is what we're witnessing. Just focusing on Europe for a minute. This here is you know, what we see happening in Europe when we're looking at the activity from governments. So at the top of this, you've got the IEA, which is, you know, confirming that there's a lot of momentum in hydrogen, a lot of activities throughout the world as part of the net zero story. The European Union, as you may know, have published their own strategy in the summer last year, with some really quite big strategic objectives there. You know, 6 gigawatts of green hydrogen by 2024 and 40 gigawatts by 2030. So really quite big ambitions there. Germany and France have committed an awful lot of funding towards hydrogen, which is interesting to note. And the UK government themselves, of course, we're talking closely with the UK government, and their strategy was published, sorry, will be published this year, but they've already set a target of 5 gigawatts of low carbon hydrogen by 2030 as part of the 10-point low carbon plan. There's a lot going on in Scotland too. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience today will be aware of these projects here. As you can see, there's clusters of projects happening in Scotland here. This isn't them all, this is just some of them, and we see quite a lot of activity there, which is good to note. These are the things that we've done in the last 12 months. These are the 4 reports that are the kind of foundation of our evidence base. The hydrogen assessment looked at the broad range of hydrogen use in Scotland. Wind to green hydrogen was specifically offshore wind to green hydrogen, and that was a really interesting study. Deep decarbonisation, this is the use of hydrogen in industry. And of course, this led up to our policy statement, which is quite a high level statement, but we think it covers the range of the things that we need to cover at the moment. The assessment report was our biggest piece of work, and it took most of last year to do. And it was really a system-wide look at hydrogen and Scotland, and how Scotland is suited to hydrogen and the development of a hydrogen economy. And it was a very interesting and useful and worthwhile piece of work. It took us through 3 scenarios, which I'll quickly go through here. So we've got 1, 2, 3. I'll go back to the first one. And these are not predictions. These are just ways that hydrogen economy may develop in Scotland. And in this one, it's kind of small, focused regional play, where, you know, we've got blue and green hydrogen being developed at a reasonable scale by 2045. And it's being transported for use in Scotland in various sectors. There's tanker transport, but also some small geological storage as well. And this is distributed through local networks. This next scenario scales up quite a bit, where we have the same sort of uses of hydrogen in Scotland, but we've also got this export potential to the rest of the UK, because we're producing more than we actually need. And this is where the export sort of side of things economically comes into play, which seems to be quite a promising future for Scotland if we can make this happen. Again, we've got blue hydrogen and green hydrogen here. And as you can see, 46 terawatt hours there, it's quite a lot of hydrogen developing by 2045, and 20 terawatt hours of that going down south to export to the rest of the UK to help them with their net zero targets. an even bigger ambition here, where we have this big international export focus for Scotland. And this is really ramping up here in 2045 in this model, where we've got 126 terawatt hours of green hydrogen. I haven't featured blue hydrogen in this because it doesn't seem to be, at this point, an attractive proposition to export blue hydrogen, but that may develop in future. But in terms of green hydrogen here, we've got a really large amount of hydrogen being produced in Scotland and exported abroad, but also used locally as well. But with all scenarios, we, as you know, the truth is somewhere in the middle here. So what we can see developing is a mixture of all of these scenarios. We've got kind of regional growth, we've got an export opportunity, and quite big domestic use of hydrogen going forward. And this is how we're taking forward our action plan. So the policy statement, this was published in December. I hope you've had a chance to read it. This is the kind of key takeaways from the policy side, that what it does is, for the first time, it gives us a public view of hydrogen, and it's a supportive view. So the Scottish Government supports the strategic growth of a strong hydrogen economy in Scotland. So we think that this could be good for Scotland, the hydrogen economy, in many different ways. In order to sort of keep momentum going, we've set an ambition of 5 gigawatts of renewable and low carbon hydrogen, that's blue and green, by 2030. 5 gigawatts is a lot of hydrogen. We think it's about 27 terawatt hours, a mixture of blue and green. So it's a fair amount of hydrogen, and an even bigger ambition, 25 gigawatts by 2045. Some of that will be exported, as I mentioned earlier. Some of it will be used domestically. We've also, in order to make this advance and accelerate, we've committed £100 million of funding towards the development of the hydrogen economy in Scotland, and that's over the next 5 years. That's 2021 to 2026. We support blue and green hydrogen and the development of both, which is, I think it's very important to note that, because we have the ability, we think the capability, the resources to produce both, which is, we're in quite a limited group of countries that can do that, actually. And this means that it's linked to carbon capture storage, which is very important for blue hydrogen, essential for that to come online too. And again, what I've mentioned there is that we continue to support the demonstration of hydrogen and deployment in smaller scale, and hopefully moving into commercial scale over the next 5 years. Some examples of the things that we've done over the last couple of months, actually, very recent investments. This is an investment here that just before the end of last year, we funded a project to introduce a hydrogen gas engine at the airport at Kirkwall, producing electricity to overcome the sort of grid issues that they have there. So that's being installed in the next month or so, and we'll be starting to work quite soon. And it just shows another use of hydrogen that we think is part of the picture. Small scale, but useful to note. Another useful to note project is this here, which is the flow cell Vanadium Battery system in Orkney. Another way to try and even out the intermittency of the renewable electricity supply there. Our flagship project is this project, which is H100. This is a £27 million project, and it's to build a hydrogen network, 100% green network, hydrogen for heating for homes. And it's about 300 homes there, I think just a wee bit more than that. And this is now a live project, fully funded. Scottish Government have funded about 7 million, 6.9 million to be exact. The other funders are Ofgem and the other gas operators as well. So that's in Leavenmouth, it's in Fife, connected to the ORE catapult wind turbine there, that's just off the shore. Another couple of examples of research that we've kicked off this year is the LOC shipping study. This is examining how to transport hydrogen long distances by ship. And what it will do is it will do a cost appraisal of the different methods that you can use to transport hydrogen, as ammonia, as LOHC, and we'll get some sort of cost analysis of that. Another piece of work is a work between France and Scotland on engineering solutions to offshore hydrogen production. This is production offshore, using offshore wind. And we're also very closely engaging with the Scottish Science Advisory Council. And of course, yourselves here, ETP, you know, very well regarded institute, and very keen to continue close collaboration with ETP. Our action plan, so the hydrogen policy statement delivered in December, our action plan will be delivered this year. The action plan will be more dynamic, and it will set out the things that we're going to do to make the policy statement happen. I suppose that's the way to think of it. So it's a more dynamic, action-focused report, and it will be able to sort of marshal our resources together to achieve what we want to achieve. Very important part of the action plan will be the Scottish supply chain and engaging them to make sure that Scottish content is delivered through this ambition. And Veronica will talk about that a bit more. That's more Veronica's area of expertise than mine. And this is the ambition that we set out. This is our public ambition set out in the policy statement. It's to be a leading hydrogen nation, and I'm sure you've seen that already. And what we want to do in order to do that is to become the producer of lowest cost hydrogen in Europe by 2045. So it's quite a big ambition, and it's very much focused on playing a role internationally as an exporter of hydrogen, but also we will use hydrogen to decarbonise our own system too, where it's appropriate. Back to this is something that was commissioned about 2 years ago, and this is a vision of maybe what might happen in the future. In this diagram, you've got offshore wind, which is dedicated offshore wind in this diagram. It doesn't have to be that way, but just for the purposes of this kind of vision, dedicated offshore wind, supplying a large electrolyser plant, which is producing large-scale hydrogen. Activities happening at the harbour and port there, storage and the transportation of hydrogen to international and UK markets, but also serving the indigenous need there of industry, heat and transport where appropriate, and also potentially, not to forget, an oxygen market. That could be a potential other revenue stream for this type of plant. So this year we're looking to try and work through how we would consent such a thing as this. So that's one of the pieces of policy work that we'll do this year, is to provide guidance on how to consent such a thing. This will be done through part of a larger programme just now, which is kicked off just about a month ago, which is an SEA on the action plan. So this is a strategic environmental assessment. We've appointed consultants to take that forward to understand the environmental impact of our plans going forward for hydrogen. And Stephen, Mark, I'll leave that there. That's my last slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. So again, I'll underline that if you want to ask questions of the panel, could you please put them in the Q&A session, and we will ask the questions at that time. So thank you for Stuart. So now we'll move on to Veronica Noon. So Veronica is Head of Energy Strategy at the Scottish Enterprise. So Veronica, over to you.
Hi. Right, I'm just going to try and, so, okay, that's great. So it's clear from what Stuart has said that clean hydrogen is going to play a major role globally in the transition to net zero, and Scotland's assets, natural, human and physical, mean we can be a major player and reap significant economic rewards in this emerging global market. So now with the hydrogen policy statement published and the action plan in development, we have strong context and motivation to move our own SE and enterprise agencies programmes onto maximising the economic impact of the broader Scottish Government activity. We've also seen UK Government's 10-point plan and can expect to see the UK hydrogen strategy later this year. It's also important to note, Stuart has, that other countries are really gearing up. So Germany has €9 billion over the next decade committed to developing hydrogen, and France 7 billion. And this is going to create opportunities, but also clearly competition. So this presentation describes the opportunity at a high level and sets out how the opportunity might be seized and the steps we need to take before looking at the supply chain opportunities, which I have to say is a work in progress. We're working on it. Next slide, please. So Stuart has covered this. All I really want to say is that the enterprise agencies have been very much involved in helping with the evidence base that provided the input to the policy statement and are already very much engaged in the action plan. Next slide, please. We know that a huge amount of both renewable just a second. Got a message in telling me something's not going quite right. Okay.
It's going fine, Veronica, don't worry.
Okay, we've moved on a little bit too fast in terms of the slides. I need to go back to number 3. And yes, so we know that we're going to need a huge amount of renewable and clean energy to decarbonise energy use as we move to 2045. We also know that we need So these 3 scenarios were developed as part of the hydrogen assessment project. I think that Stuart has talked through them. They've been modelled to illustrate how Scotland could develop a future hydrogen economy, and they help to contextualise the uses of hydrogen in our energy systems and the opportunities for Scotland as a potential key exporter of large-scale green hydrogen to the rest of UK and Europe. The report concludes that this could result in new industrial opportunities of a significant scale. The headline figure for each is in there. What I would want to say there is that hydrogen production is the biggest absolute contributor of value, with the potential to generate nearly 20 billion of GVA and employ over 200,000 people in 2045 in green export. By this date, offshore hydrogen production is by far the biggest contributor of value in both hydrogen economy and green export, reflecting the rapid rollout of capacity and the relatively high value added per unit of output. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. And this slide really is just giving a little bit further detail behind those scenarios, showing GVA on the left and the jobs on the right, and breaks it down by key areas of value. And just to reiterate that the slides show that in scenarios A and B in particular, production is where the greatest prize is. Next slide, please. And this one is really quite an interesting but perhaps difficult to read slide. Focuses on different parts of Scotland and how they can add value to the growth of the overall sector. So just by way of illustration, and without going through all of the details on the slide, on the islands, it's largely green production, green hydrogen production within integrated energy systems context, where knowledge-based services, say design and consulting, would be used. Also platform assembly, electrolyser deployment, and SMR, steam methane reforming, deployment and operation, manufacturing, balance of plant, electrolyser assembly, bus assembly, transport and heat hub. In Aberdeen, where there's a huge amount of activity currently, it's blue and green production, so SMR and electrolyser deployment and operation and offshore servicing, transport and heat hub, so on. Next slide, please. And Scotland could grow a strong hydrogen economy, supporting jobs and GVA growth. The Hydrogen Assessment Project did a detailed assessment of the supply chain opportunities, and this was actually further followed up with the green hydrogen production project that the research that Exodus led on. There are key areas of strength within Scotland, within the supply chain, but gaps remain for both blue and green hydrogen. And this will need to be addressed to really get most value from this sector. Grasping the opportunity, though, it was going to mean a hell of a lot of coordination of effort across industry and government to bring all of the moving parts together. And we would need a clear strategy and a clear ambition. It's going to require going beyond the many pilot projects, some of which Stuart's talked about there, to building projects that are commercial and scalable. And these projects have been pioneering, but they've taken a lot of public sector investment, and we need to bring private sector investment into this. They continue, however, to be important to help build supply chain capability and capacity. Hydrogen is not the answer everywhere. Some which will go down the electric route, that's absolutely clear. But hydrogen will play a role in certain circumstances. That said, within an energy system, hydrogen has a pretty unique role in integrating vectors. I think the final point I want to make on this slide is that we really need to move quickly. We've got the momentum now, but other countries are moving their own hydrogen agendas forward as well. Next slide, please. And as Stuart said, there's a hell of a lot already going on. The really interesting thing about Scotland is that there's been a vast array of really pioneering projects on the ground, and that's without a strong policy push. The strengthened policy framework should help Scotland to build on the projects, scale them up and commercialise. However, without projects on the ground in Scotland to demonstrate and commercialise hydrogen production and supply at scale, Scotland's not going to be able to unlock its potential nor attract supply chain transition and investment. So it's critical that in the 2020s, we deliver projects and collaboration opportunities for our companies, as well as demonstrate our intent for large-scale production of hydrogen in the longer term, in order to attract investment and a global market presence as an energy centre of excellence. Next slide, please. Just going to skip that one because I've been over some of that already, and I know that Stuart has talked about it. This slide gives a sense of the journey. There's a lot of existing activity. There's a really good, strong ecosystem out there. This gives a broad sweep of the activity already underway, some of which is already focused on the growth of this sector, and some that needs to be steered further towards the pursuit of a hydrogen economy. But we need our supply chains and academia to be part of the journey. Scottish academia has played a huge role in supporting the national energy mix and agenda, and is currently conducting some world-leading academic research in hydrogen, including the HyStor PAW, which is looking at storage potential in old gas seams, and the Hydrogen Accelerator, which obviously St Andrews, you're all very aware of, is about bringing together universities, public sector and industry. Next slide, please. This heat cluster map has been drawn from the green hydrogen work that I mentioned earlier, and I know that Stuart mentioned as well. This gives a picture of where some of our strengths are in this particular area and some of our weaknesses. In order to get the complete picture, we need a similar one looking at blue hydrogen production, including CCUS. We need one that looks at large-scale hydrogen storage, domestic distribution, and hydrogen for heat. And so to make that picture complete, this just gives an illustration of some of the mapping work that we've been doing, some of the research that we've been doing. There's other work underway. So the CCSA is leading on a piece of work currently, which will give us much more on the blue hydrogen supply chain as well. And our work over the next few months will be very much about mapping this further and beginning the strong engagement work that we need to do between ourselves in the enterprise agencies, OGTC, one in Aberdeen, and various other agencies. And next slide, please. I thought I would actually show you this slide. I think this is going to be of some interest to you. Our partners at OGTC are looking at a net zero North Sea basin and are looking at technologies which will help to achieve this. Their focus is on the technological challenges facing floating offshore wind, variable and robust cabling systems, for instance, and integration. Hydrogen production, looking at transport and storage challenges, looking at barriers and alternatives to batteries, and hydrogen production and CCUS technology challenges, looking at modular. Setting out what the challenges are in terms of where we need to get costs down and in which elements there need to be cost reductions, and working on the various technologies around that. And we will be working very closely with OGTC around that activity. Next slide, please. And this is my final slide. The Scottish supply chain is well positioned to support an steady pipeline of hydrogen developments over the next decade is going to be absolutely key to ensuring the development of an indigenous supply chain so that Scotland is ready to deliver and take advantage of full commercial deployment. As I said, we're working further on mapping the supply chain, and we need to do that in some depth, but we've got really quite a lot already around green hydrogen supply chain. In order to embed and grow the Scottish supply chain, we need demonstrator projects and energy hubs to accelerate. We need to continue to work with offshore and onshore wind developers to promote the opportunity for hydrogen. Targeted challenge funds could be developed to support industry supply chain collaborations, energy hubs to act as clusters to accelerate activity and supply chain transition and growth. For example, the Energy Transition Fund up in Aberdeen. And that's all I want to say. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that, Veronica. Our final panelist, Professor John Irvine, is the chair of the Hydrogen Accelerator. So over to you, John.
Okay, we got the slide. Can you see my slides and hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and see your slide, John.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so yeah, it's very nice to be here and very good to continue working with ETP and the Hydrogen Accelerator. Just one thing to announce before I start is that there will be a BDM point starting next month. Liam McCarran, who will work, will be under, be linked to St Andrews, and Graham is theme leader, so it'll be Graham Cook and myself and the Hydrogen Accelerator team that will be advising him. So that's a really important development. So I'm going to talk about hydrogen now, and about the Hydrogen Accelerator. So a lot of you may still be wondering what the Hydrogen Accelerator is, and it's really an enabler. It's trying to make things happen. We're here to help academia, policy, companies get together and do things. That's kind of apt, because if you ask what is hydrogen, well, it's on its own. It's not really that brilliant for it. It's not an objective in itself, but the reason hydrogen is so important is it is an enabler, and there are many things we can do much better with hydrogen, and that's why we need to focus on it. So in the talk, I'll explain a little bit about what Hydrogen Accelerator has done since it started about 9 months ago. Key part of that is you kind of see how complex everything is and how interconnected, and really, it's really important that you can deliver a full ecosystem, Because if you push just one part of the jigsaw, it's not going to go anywhere. And to make things happen really quickly in Scotland, we need to pull these things together and do them in parallel. And we can build very fast. I think that there's huge activity, huge interest, and it just seems to accelerate exponentially. And at the end, I will just come back to academic challenge and you know what I think we should be doing, and just lead into the questions. So the Hydrogen Accelerator is here to facilitate realisation of Scotland's hydrogen future. We're going to provide expertise, mentoring and support, either from our own officers, our own team, or very importantly, we will link into academic support to help government and companies develop projects. We'll be a good point of contact to help coordinate Scotland's initiatives on the ground. We're looking to create new opportunities, and of course, as we all know, hydrogen is key in defining and delivering decarbonisation in Scotland. So you could say we do technology assessment, engineering optimisation and standardisation, we do matchmaking, and we do outreach and communication. And we do that as part of a much bigger system, and we want to bring everybody together. So we'd like to increase the expert capacity, not just the Hydrogen Accelerator, but to build and link to people across the Scottish community. To improve coordination, I think we can do things really fast if we work together. And we'll also can keep an eye on the evolution of hydrogen-related technologies, and things like safety are really important. We can't afford to make some mistakes that have been made in other countries. So just needs common sense and a little bit of care and some good engineering. As has been mentioned with the two previous speakers, Scotland's renewables and offshore and onshore wind is growing at a pace, and so much so that it's very easy to see we've got much more renewables than we'll be able to use in the very near future. And one example is the NNG wind farm, which you can see from my back door, which is why I repeat this. But there's a lot more going on, especially further up the east coast. But that alone is half a gigawatt. You've seen similar slides to this before. There's a lot of things going on across in Scotland. It's really the seeds are being sown, and we just need to link these together and build on these. The Scottish Government has an ambitious timeline, so we're looking to the public sector fleet decarbonised by 2025, emission-free city centres 2030, phasing out of new petrol and diesel cars 2032, rail passenger services 2035, flights within Scotland 2040, and net zero by 2045. And of course, as you'll know, that the Hydrogen Accelerator is very much focused on the transport aspects from hydrogen. So why hydrogen? Why not batteries? Well, batteries are just fine and will do a lot of things that we need. But you just need to think of where batteries are king and where hydrogen delivers. And it's for larger vehicles, buses, trucks, ferries, and maybe some low-end flight you can do with hydrogen. For something like transatlantic flight, you probably have to go to synthetic fuels and ammonia, and that's also going to be something very important for long distance shipping. An illustration of where things might be happening, that these are thoughts about Glasgow and trying to develop a net zero fleet by 2030. So there's innovation in developing vehicles like road sweepers, refuge trucks, etc., going on across Scotland. We're working at hydrogen generation facilities in Scotland through industry, developing charging and hydrogen business models. So very often you'll want to charge centrally or provide hydrogen centrally for fleets. System integration is really important. tech transfer, creating new industry around batteries and hydrogen buses. That's progressing at a pace. Refueling is really important and a real challenge. We need a lot more hydrogen to redo what we want, but obviously you need things to do it with as well at the same time. And a lot of interest in ferries and shipping, and indeed in the long term, it's hard to see hydrocarbon fuels being used offshore, and it's got to be some sort of hydrogen-based fuel. Jive 2 is the Dundee bus project, and the Hydrogen Accelerator has also helped here. For example, helping with the techno-economic assessments, and contracts are being signed, and this is now moving forward as a European support. That's linked very much to MSIP and the hydrogen refueling station that will be placed there. There are 2 megawatt wind turbines linked to that, and very often you want to see local renewables and hydrogen production for transport applications. Again, is green hydrogen something that within Scotland is really important, and I think globally it's very highly recognised that green hydrogen would be ideal if we can manage it. Another thing related to MSAP that we're developing is a proposal for a vehicle testing facility, so to enable development of battery electric and hydrogen powertrains. And you will rarely see a hydrogen vehicle that doesn't have a major battery drive. So these two technologies are used to get together. Then something that we've been able to enable is the accelerator has led the delivery of a contract on a zero emission train, and this is one of the carriages going to Bowness, and you can see the Kelpies in the background, and some Glasgow artwork on its way to, which I think looks quite good actually. The objectives of the train is to show that we can do it and create a supply chain. Hydrogen trains have been developed before. We want to create economic opportunities for Scotland. We want to create high quality jobs, and we want, again, to develop the supply chain. That's really important. The contract, procurement, and the contract has been delivered by St Andrews and the Hydrogen Accelerator, Transport Scotland, MSIP, Scottish Enterprise, and SNC Lavalin. And that's created a huge amount of interest, and suppliers are actually ringing me up on cold calls every week. The zero emission train itself has been delivered by Arcola Energy, who are leading and designing it. I think it's fair to say that they have a Scottish focus. I don't want to give full details of that, but that will become very apparent very soon, exactly what that is. Arup, providing specialist rail engineering expertise. Avid Risk Consulting are looking at compliance and health and safety, and Aegis on third-party safety certification and compliance. So if you think about trains, only 28% of Scotland's rail tracks are electrified, and those are obviously the busiest lines. But we need to either electrify more lines or battery or hydrogen lines, and there's about half a dozen lines that are too remote and difficult that will have to be hydrogen. So Ben Todd is here on the left, and this is helping us deliver our environmental strategy. So coming to the main points of what I think we need to look at is, one thing that's really important is to have a whole systems approach. And this is split a little bit to fleets, but it goes much beyond that. So you've got generation, you've got transport, integration and investment, You need charging, you need skills, refueling. Manufacturing is really important. There's huge opportunities for developing industries to manufacture, and these things will happen where hydrogen projects are being delivered successfully and sensibly. There's a lot of jobs in this sector, a lot of them in maintenance and warranty. Like a lot of renewable energies, there's actually a lot more employment available locally, and clean energy will create more jobs than was in the fossil energy economy. Maybe not in some areas, but generally across the country and across the world, renewables and low carbon are much better for employment. And then just looking at research challenges. So this is my day job. It's looking at research and green hydrogen. We need lots and lots and lots of green hydrogen. We need to have this at scale. We need to manufacture the capability. We need to improve efficiency, because cost is king. You need to be competing with diesel, and durability is very much part of that. Storage is key. Subsea, geological containers. Chemistry is really important, probably just as important as energy engineering. So chemical storage in terms of, say, ammonia. There's a Scottish project on organic hydrogen carrier, Scottish government project on organic hydrogen carriers, something that's been around for most of my lifetime. Methanol. There's also utilization. So the chemicals industry already uses a lot of hydrogen, and future chemical industries will use more. Cement production can use a lot of hydrogen, and steel also, although that's probably not within Scotland, but we could look to export hydrogen for that. Utilization of carbon dioxide, and that's a really good way of storing it. Hydrogen is really important, as I said, for large vehicles, fleets and trains. In marine applications, we should be looking to fuel cell drive, and the fuels of choice, I think, are ammonia and methanol. So that these are not only carriers, but they are easy to convert on board. We've got to work with battery technology and other electrochemical techniques, so integration of and optimizing what gives you the best cost solution in transport. Needs is very important. One thing we can do quite quickly is put 20% of hydrogen into the gas grid. That's slowly getting closer to being acceptable, and that saves CO2 today, not in 10 years' time. There's a lot of interest in the H2 grid, and that's very much where the blue hydrogen has a really key role, but that will take some time perhaps. Combined heat and power and working hydrogen fuel cells with heat pumps is really important. We have a vast need for skills. We're going to create lots of jobs. We need people to understand and be able to use these things. And people like Lewis Castle College have got a lot to offer in developing courses for people. Safety is really important. Economics, cost has to be appropriate. The value to the economy is really important. There are legal aspects, there are ethics, there's energy justice, and the question marks are for just to add to that. And just to close, say a little bit more about who Hydrogen Accelerator are. We're a collaboration between St Andrews and Strathclyde, strongly supported by Eden and PNDC. Our masters are Transport Scotland, who we respond to, and we try to feed through to industry, public sector, research institutions, and especially to academic experts. And we're here to facilitate and enable. When I say we, I mean Snea, Fiona, Martin, and Kimberly. These are our key people who we should please come to us, and we're here to help. That's the purpose of the accelerator. That's the prime purpose. And just to close on our contact slides, contact details. So, thank you for listening to me. And
great, thank you very much for that, John, for that overview. So without further ado then, we're going to just in a minute move over to the panel. Just to remind you, if you would like to ask a question of the panel, to please put your question into the Q&A section of Teams. We already have about half a dozen questions ready to go. So it will be Graham and Jerry who will be moderating and asking the questions. So they will read the questions in the Q&A session and then directly ask the panelists those questions which I think are most appropriate. So in that respect, over to you, Graham and Jerry.
Thank you very much, Steve and Mark, and thank you to all of the speakers this morning. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so quite a lot of questions have already come in. So the first one really is, will the slides be made available after the event? I assume that's the case, but I guess the speakers need to confirm that.
Yeah, the speakers have already confirmed, so it's just a question of logistics. I think that's fine. Okay, shall I then ask the next one? So the first question then would be, could Stuart expand on the reasons as to why hydrogen with CCS made in Scotland would not be competitive for exports, or that's how it's worded? So
yeah, thanks, Jerry. Thanks for that question. It's a really good question, actually. And it's not really a case of being competitive. It's a case of where we're seeing the demand, so or lack of. So Germany is a good example where the concentration there and the focus is on green hydrogen for import. They will accept blue, it seems, but you have to look pretty deep into that strategy to find out that line. So I think there are reasons why it's really the demand side that's saying that they would prefer green hydrogen. We do realise that blue hydrogen will potentially be cheaper.
Okay. Another question for you, Stuart, I think. So how do you define low cost?
For us, it's lowest cost is what we're trying to achieve, and lowest cost is in comparison to what the competitors. So other countries are also trying to develop export strategies for hydrogen. The figure that is often quoted is £2 per kilo for green hydrogen delivered. That's delivered at the quayside. Our hydrogen, our work on the offshore to green hydrogen study looked at that, and it concluded that could be achieved in certain circumstances by about 2030. So that's a kind of rule of thumb that people are going for at the moment. Personally, I think that will have to be a bit lower than that, to be honest. And scale is really important. I think just as John mentioned there, the scale in Scotland is, the potential is to go really big. So that will drive down costs, we hope. There's a lot of efficiencies that need to happen with electrolyzers too, and how these systems integrate. And maybe we can get into that discussion a bit later. The takeaway from our stakeholders that I always quote is that electrolyzers, if they are currently VHS, they need to get to Netflix version very quickly, very big.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay. So go ahead, Graham. Is that right? Thank you for a good talk, Stuart, from one of our questioners. And what's the approximate timescale for the hydrogen action plan?
It will be post-election. So we have an election this year in Scotland, as everyone will know. Very difficult to get that delivered before election. So post-election, so that's pushing into May, June time frame. But not that much later. So in civil service, we call that summer. So I think summer is the answer. Not autumn, summer.
I think this next question is for the whole panel, I think. Do you see Scotland including any other pathways for producing hydrogen, such as the gasification of biomass?
Could I answer that a little bit?
Yes, please, John. Yeah.
I mean, one of the if you gasify biomass, you can also produce synthetic fuels from that. So I wouldn't just necessarily go straight to hydrogen, because if we're looking at fuels for flight, then it's hard to see anything other than Fischer-Tropsch fuels giving a green alternative. So I would certainly look at that. You can get hydrogen from it, but you should also look at what the alternatives are. There's a lot of useful stuff in there, like with high energy, that can be perhaps capitalized.
Thanks, John.
Okay, and then the next question is around separate funding support mechanisms available for Scottish SMEs in the hydrogen tech sector. So again, it's not targeted at a particular panel member. Who would like to go first on that? Is that something in your space, Veronica, or should we take it to John?
No, I'm not entirely sure what the question is. Is it that will there be separate funding for hydrogen SMEs? I think that is the question. I think what we're looking at here is trying to develop the ecosystem to support hydrogen, and that will go through from early stage R&D within SMEs and upwards. So I can see that there will be more targeted support for those sorts of enterprises. And, we'll see as we go through the action plan and develop the work streams within that, just where that will be focused. But yes, I mean, absolutely, there will be additional support in this area.
John, would you like to add anything there in terms of could the Hydrogen Accelerator help in that space?
Yeah, you thought better than I did. I thought I shrugged my shoulders, but actually, yes, we're putting together a package of funding sources. So Kim Tweedy in particular will be sharing funding opportunities and collating those, and there are other sources as well you can get that, such as PNDC. But Kimberly would be a good person to speak to.
Is there anything, the big picture end, yeah.
So can I just add to what the other panelists have said and agree? In my experience of funding hydrogen projects over the past, quite a few years, I've never come across a single, a project that isn't a collaboration. So the way that these things seem to be working, in my view, is that, in my experience, is that there are collaborations that go forward between a number of SMEs and perhaps a bigger player. I think that will continue, but I think we also need to make sure that when we're designing our financial instruments, that we don't leave out SMEs as well, because they will play an important role, particularly regionally. And I think that's something that as we are shaping our funding landscape going forward, we'll make sure that that's a part of that.
Right.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think the next question follows on from the previous discussion about collaborators, and it probably goes out to Steve and Mark, this particular question. How do you get industrial collaborators for applying for ETP funds?
So the best thing to do is, if you have a project in mind, is just to connect with us. So at the moment, if you're talking specifically about hydrogen, then at the moment that would kind of fall within the energy conversion and storage theme. And as John Irvin has just mentioned, we have a new energy conversion and storage business development manager who starts on the 1st of March, I believe, John, in St Andrews. So that would be the first port of call. We have a database of around 600 SMEs in ETP who we have worked with. So if that's what you're looking for to be matched with a company, I'm sure we could do that. But I'm sure also that John's organisation, anyway, Hydrogen Accelerator, could probably help you. If you already have a collaborator, then just come along with your project and we will assess it with a view to ETP funding, but also we assess projects for suitability for other funding as well. It's not just ETP funding. I know, John, do you have anything else to say about
that? Obviously, Graham's theme coordinator, so Liam will also be responding to theme to Graham. And yeah, these days moving to working in St Andrews, it doesn't quite mean working in St Andrews. Well, it'll still be in Glasgow for a while, I think.
Right.
Okay, so that's great. So the next question has got a few different angles to it. It's about the rationality of building another infrastructure to distribute hydrogen when the questioner believes we could use the existing power grid. So I thought there's a couple of angles to go down there. So Stuart, would you like to talk about the feasibility of that in relation to what you've found out during the activities that have been going on in the last few months? And then after that, we'll pass on to Veronica to ask about the enthusiasm of the capability to put a distribution in place from the Scottish supply chain. But Stuart, if you wanted to kick off, that would be great. Oh, something's going on there.
Stuart, you're muted, I'm afraid.
I beg your pardon. Jamie, in terms of that question, is the question around the gas grid or is it the electricity grid? Just to be sure.
I'm reading it as being that why don't we just use the electricity grid, the power grid? We guess the power grid would be the electricity grid. So yeah. Okay,
so using grid electricity for green hydrogen production is something that's worth exploring, and that's part of our plan, but it's difficult to say that that's green. So when you get into certification of green, etc., and standardization, particularly if your green use of hydrogen is connected to things like RTFO, Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation, I don't think it would stand up to be green because your grid is not green. It's annoying in Orkney because they do have a green grid, but it still doesn't qualify. If you're going to use that, then we need to design our systems to cope with that, because it does make sense to use grid electricity when we can, and how to classify that is important. Using the gas grid to move hydrogen about is another idea that is really sensible to do. It's really sensible also to repurpose oil and gas pipelines if we can, to store hydrogen perhaps in future, through inserting a sleeve. So all of these options of repurposing and reusing what we've already got instead of spending new money, it's a very Scottish approach, and it's something that I think we need to fully explore.
Okay, and John, would you like to, thank you very much, Stuart, would you like to just, I see you're very keen to come in there, did you want to comment on that?
This is a hobby horse, so it's quite, you wouldn't convert electrons to hydrogen if you could use the electrons. You lose a lot of energy, so you would never do that. But if you think about battery vehicles, the grid is nowhere near powerful enough to couple in the amount of battery vehicles we have, never mind to start producing hydrogen as well. So the costs and the ability of the grid to cope is, it's a threefold increase in the grid for electric vehicles alone. If every car was a battery car. So yes, we'd love, I think using the grid to produce hydrogen would be fine, but it's just it's really far away from being achievable. It would cost much more than what Stuart is proposing. And the gas grid is a very attractive way of moving hydrogen. So a lot of energy in the gas grid.
Yeah, John, the point about the grid I was making was that there are examples where curtailed electricity, electricity that's not needed, it could be used there. So we have a system benefit of hydrogen that we need to explore. And also, it depends what you need that energy for. If you need a molecule and not an electron, then hydrogen's a good option. And if you have too many electrons and you're not using them, it might be quite useful to adapt your system to divert that to hydrogen creation, hydrogen production, so that you can use that molecule in a different way. So I agree with John. It's just I just had to finesse that just a wee bit.
Sure. And Veronica, would you like to comment about the supply chain capabilities in Scotland to do this? I mean, how practical is it for us to go beyond the electrical grid and create a range of other ways of delivering the energy to end users, and how would the Scottish supply chain fit into that?
Yeah, I think I unfortunately missed an awful lot of the response there, because I don't know if you noticed that I was frozen out because I've got intermittent internet connection here. So the question was around the supply chain.
Yeah, it's about going beyond the grid. The original question was about, could we just supply all the power through the grid, and it's moved on to having recognised the need that we can't simply do it entirely with the grid. It'd be worth just addressing the practicality and the potential for the supply chain from having the hydrogen infrastructure that you would implicitly need.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but it is intermittent, so I didn't hear all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think that the work that we've done on the supply chain is showing that we do have some real strengths in it, and there are developing the technology within Scotland by further innovation or by bringing it in from elsewhere. I think the conversation about the grid versus sort of decentralized activity, absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen examples all over the place of where it is possible to look at the demand and supply and distribution within local energy systems. So I do think that we do have good supply chain strengths in those integrated systems as well. So I think that there are some real opportunities there. Yeah.
I think the next question goes to the whole panel. So what's the appetite of the major oil and gas players in Scotland to transition to hydrogen, and what are the key areas of challenge in doing so? Stuart, I think you're on mute, Stuart.
Yeah, I was just waiting to see if anyone wanted to go first. So the appetite from the oil and gas sector is growing. I think that's the way to describe that. There are some big companies getting really involved in hydrogen and making some investments in hydrogen too. Are they important? Yes, they are. I think they are. Particularly in blue hydrogen production, but also the skills that they have to move into green hydrogen production is not to be underestimated as well. The other key movers in this hydrogen sort of environment just now are ports and harbours, and a lot of them have oil and gas backgrounds too. And where there is a refinery, for instance, there seems to be, you're near a port, and we're seeing evidence of this activity in Antwerp and Rotterdam and Hamburg as well, in Grangemouth and Aberdeen, South Harbour, all that sort of stuff. So yes, I think they're an important part of the play. We also have, from Transport Scotland, we have a just transition concept that we really want to embrace. So moving people from, adjacent industries like oil and gas into hydrogen would be a sensible thing to do, and that will be part of our skills outreach. I think a company that's a good example of that is Hydrosun, if anyone knows that company. That's oil and gas, but also, over the past decade or so has moved into hydrogen too. So that's a good example of a company that is moving, its board is moving into hydrogen, in quite a big way as well.
I would just add to that. I think Stuart's absolutely right. There is a growing interest, as you might imagine. We're seeing interest in blue and green, predominantly blue. We are seeing it through the Northeast Carbon Capture, Utilisation and Storage Network, where there's quite an impressive array of companies actually very interested in all of the work that's going on around that, the roadmap for decarbonisation and so on. So interest in hydrogen from that point of view. I put up a slide from OGTC, who are working with that sector very, very closely, looking at the opportunities that there are across the different technology areas, floating wind, in storage, in transportation, and in CCUS. So, you know, with their kind of net zero solutions center, bringing in industry in that way is actually, you know, that there is that growing interest and recognition of the importance of this. So I think that we're seeing a lot of really, really useful activity here. Hydrosun is a great example of that, but there are others. There are real opportunities to transfer some of those technologies into this sector, and I think a bit of an appetite to do just that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, and so for the next question, there's what research is needed to enable more widespread hydrogen, more widespread applications of hydrogen, e.g. for fleet applications. I'd propose to put that to Fiona, if we could, just to start with. I know she's sitting there waiting to produce the end remarks, but I can't think of anyone better than Fiona to talk about the fleet angle of what the fleet need from in R&D to deploy hydrogen, and then we could go to John and widen it out to the more general question.
Thank you, Jerry. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I suppose in fleet terms, it is it's chicken and egg, and that's the challenge, is to get the hydrogen production side up and actually have the offtake. So very much focus on transport applications and heavy fleet vehicles, as we mentioned earlier on, but they're not readily available. So there's a big opportunity in Scotland to really build up that Scottish supply chain as well. But we really have to scale up, and so that's the real big challenges that we have. So getting that hydrogen fuel up, get the economics right in that production of the hydrogen, and also really trying to accelerate the uptake of heavy fleet vehicles, trains, and ferries, etc. That's where the opportunities really are right now in R&D, and getting the economics right is key as well to that.
And John, would you like to discuss how those needs map into the R&D space in more detail?
Just to add to the oil and gas piece, the Norwegian government has funded some very exciting green hydrogen projects being delivered by oil and gas companies. You know, really impressive. So happy to tell you more about that later, but they're good. In terms of the fleet, I think it's cost of the hydrogen is the ultimate thing, and you know, yeah, my research would be always like to develop generation 2 and generation 3 technologies. So generation 1 is there, but we can get more efficiency, lower cost, and more durable hydrogen production. So I would say those are the basic research challenges, if that's the angle, and that's really important. There's only a very small number of electrolyzers being produced at the moment compared to what we need. So it's a reflex of it there. Stuart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So in terms of hydrogen production, and I think what companies need is a bit of confidence that hydrogen is a thing. And part of our policy statement, they're setting the ambition for 5 gigawatts by 2030 was in part to signal to industry that this is going to be an important part of our energy structure going forward. 5 gigawatts of hydrogen for Scotland is about 27 terawatt hours, for those who think of it that way. In Scotland, we use 160 terawatt hours of energy a year for our country. So 27 terawatt hours is quite a lot of hydrogen. So what we hope to do with that is to send a signal out to the market and to the industry about the ambition of Scotland to produce large-scale hydrogen quite quickly. By 2030 isn't that far away, and hopefully that might help to settle the minds of fleet owners, for instance, Fiona, who are wondering where is this hydrogen going to come from? Where are the vehicles going to come from and the technology, but also is that hydrogen going to be there in reliable quantities that I can count on at a price I can afford? I used to run a fleet. I used to be a fleet manager myself, so I know the way that people think in that sector. So we're hopeful that signal, has, that we started the conversation anyway.
Great, thanks very much, Stuart. Did you want to find anything there, Veronica?
Yeah, I was again. I think that the research areas absolutely have been covered there, and the signals that Stuart has talked about are really, really important. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I suppose it's Nigel Holmes' mantra, is we've been doing a hell of a lot in the last few years, developing some real pioneering projects on the ground that are looking at demand and supply at the same time. And we're learning by doing, and we've got to continue that learning by doing, as well as doing this additional research and throwing out the signals to investors and so on, because that is actually beginning to really reap rewards and is also helping us build a supply chain already.
Jerry, can I just come in on one other point there? Just to talk about the zero emission train project, for example, where we're looking at building up that Scottish supply chain. What's quite sad during that process is that all the high value items on componentry are not manufactured in Scotland or the UK. They're all from abroad. So there's a big opportunity during this process. We're reaching out to oil and gas companies, for instance, to see how we can support them make this transition into the hydrogen sector, when they're creating and keeping those really high value skilled jobs, as well as all the componentry, rather than all the widgets. Yes, we'll have them in Scotland. We need the high value componentry. That's where we need to go.
John, were you going to add something there?
Yeah, well, Veronica said something that raised my hackles a little bit. She said we should be doing learning and doing, in addition to research. There is no funding going to research from the UK government at present. There's a lot of good words, but it keeps getting shelved. We've been trying for 3 or 4 years to get hydrogen and fuel cell projects up and running. And it'll only be a small amount of the budget you need to do to learn and do and demonstrate. But especially if Stuart and his team can just keep reminding the government that it's not jam tomorrow. Research needs to be done early. And it is hurting a lot in the academic community that there's been a history of hydrogen. Not from several years ago, there was the US government downplayed hydrogen against batteries, and we haven't really moved out of that in the UK funding scheme. So it's really tough to get funding to do the hydrogen research that we want on, and I'm sure all the academics on the call would agree with me on that. It's compared to batteries, it's 1% of the funding.
Okay. Oh, Steve. Yeah, Stephen Mark, do you want to chip in there?
Yes, I would certainly absolutely underline what John has just said. And we see that within ETP when we reach out to the academic community to get researchers to help SMEs with any projects that they might have, is that we don't necessarily have the actual academic base because it hasn't been built up, because we haven't had the funding to build up the academic research base.
That's very useful, Stephen. Thank you. I'm going to cheat here as the moderator, someone who spent 23 years in industry doing fuel cell systems, and my links with Scotland grew out of the fact that some world-class research is done here. It's a place to come and find world-class capability, but it just needs more funding, and that's in a range of different areas, so it's all to play for. Okay, Graham.
Okay, thanks. So the next question probably goes for John. So should more emphasis be given to power to X concepts where the hydrogen can be used in conjunction with carbon capture to produce fuels and chemicals?
Well, the easy answer is yes. I mean, Jerry's also very much engaged in this, but that could also be producing ammonia. And hydrogen is very good when used locally, but if you want to move it around, it becomes more difficult, and that's where the hydrogen carriers become really important, and that's part X. You can also use hydrogen for, say, upgrading fish oil, or you can do lots of things with hydrogen. It's in terms of the ScotChem, the part X is really important, and we've got lots of renewables. We can produce, hopefully we can produce lots of hydrogen, and yeah, I think part X is really important, whether that's synthetic gas or aviation fuels or ammonia for fertilizer. There's immense opportunities there.
Okay. So the next question is quite a complicated one. It might be worth breaking into a couple of chunks. So the first part of it is around where there are more rural areas in Scotland that, as John suggested, would be too difficult to bring electrification to. Does the panel expect that, for example, in places like Highland and Islands or Dumfries and Galloway, will they be more reliant on hydrogen-based solutions as opposed to electrification? And we'll tackle the second part in a moment about the skills that come with that. So first of all, do you see a regional difference in priority for hydrogen? Maybe could we start that with Stuart? Would you be willing to tackle that first?
Yes, Jerry, thank you. I think John's point, going back to John's point, is the best way to use hydrogen is to use it in situ. So if you create it, if you need it where you create it, that saves you a lot of complications of transporting hydrogen and transforming it into things like ammonia, you know, to do that, which is additional energy. But I think it's needed in some areas. So from the islands' point of view, Scotland's we have quite a wealth of these kind of different types of communities and characteristics to explore. So we've got remote and isolated places in Scotland with low population density, but quite a high opportunity to create a lot of renewable energy. So not a lot of people, a lot of wind. And what you can do with hydrogen is different from what you can do with renewable electricity. So you can create hydrogen there, and those centres could export hydrogen and help the economy locally, or they could turn that hydrogen to use for heat and for transport and perhaps ferries as well. So we have an opportunity in Scotland to take this approach. A lot of countries don't have this variety of different sort of areas, so we can do this in Scotland. And we're very keen to explore these things. And we see a lot of projects coming forward in the islands looking at that very thing. So we're, you know, assessing those and, you know, looking at what we can do there. So I think it is a big opportunity for Scotland, is to show what can happen regionally, almost energy independence for these island areas. Orkney is a good example, but also Lewis, and, you know, there's lots of other places too. There's a lot to explore.
Great, thanks very much, Stuart. Veronica, would you like to add something to that, perhaps around the second half of the question, which I'll read out now, which is, and how could reskilling / apprenticeships in rural areas be supported? So this might fit in very much with developing the supply chain. So would you be willing to comment on that, Veronica? Is that something you could speak to at all?
I don't think she can hear us quite right.
Oh, fortunately not. I think you're right, Fiona. Stuart, yeah, let's take it back to you then.
Sorry, just while Veronica's sorting out the issues there.
I'm back.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
But
Veronica,
carry on, because I didn't hear the question. So carry on, Stuart.
There was a report that was done about a year ago on the situation at Orkney and the hydrogen investments that happened there and the local economic effect, particularly on young apprentices and skills and jobs, etc. And it was quite complimentary, actually. I'll try and dig it out and forward it to you guys so that you can put it in the, you know, this kind of legacy chat here. But what it showed was that there was quite a key retention of local young people in jobs, particularly engineering, sort of high value jobs related to the hydrogen opportunity. So it was a really good case study. I'll try and find that and circulate it. But it was really encouraging from a hydrogen policy point of view, that those investments in Orkney that have been done over the years have retained people there, local people with good jobs. So it's really encouraging what happened.
Great. Thank you very much, Stuart. I'll just try and take that back to Veronica, if you can hear me. So the first part was around the regional difference in need for hydrogen, and the second part around reskilling and apprenticeships in rural areas that could be supported on the back of this. Be able to get that?
Yeah, no, I think on the geography question, there have been, as Stuart says, lots of projects out there that the islands have really moved ahead with hydrogen. And we're going to see it play out, electrification and hydrogen, play out in different ways in different areas and different regions. And I think that's what the energy strategy said. And that is what's happening. But things like, decisions around the gas grid will start to influence how we deal with the gas grid and how we use hydrogen. They are really going to have quite a big impact on the kind of regional distribution of this. So I think, yes, and we are going to see more where hydrogen is produced, where it is where it's going to be used as well because of the transport issues. On the skills front, there is quite a lot happening at the moment anyway with the skills action plan, looking at the different opportunities that there are within the hydrogen and electrification sectors. Also looking at the transfer of oil and gas skills to these areas as well. So absolutely, and there will be some niche apprenticeship schemes in the way that Stuart's talked as well, because I think there will be some specialisms required in certain areas. But the SDS, Scottish Government, are alive to the need to actually do quite a lot around the skills area. So absolutely, there'll be attention focused on those sorts of skills.
Great, thank you very much. John, did you want to add anything there at all about skills and training, or?
Yeah, I just come back. Ian Bryden was a great exponent of tidal energy, and he recommended buying property in the remote areas, because if you look at where all the big cities are, they're built around sources of energy, whether it's coal or rivers. So you can think that there's great opportunity in the remote areas. The house prices are still cheap. So.
Did you want to comment at all about the kind of forthcoming plans and ideas around training and education? I know that the university sector is different from the college part of that, but there's a lot of collaboration going on to make sure that there's a continuity of development of people.
No, I agree. We need to work together as well, but clearly that most of the people are needed are going to be developed are going to be trained in the college sector. There's immense need, because there's no point rolling out new technologies if we can't use it properly.
Yeah.
So there's a number of discussions going around. MSIP, Cromarty, and Lewis Castle College are all quite exercised about developing skills in hydrogen and perhaps batteries as well. Actually, there's not so much skills in electric vehicles as we need. There's a nice package there.
And we're seeing those collaborative partnerships coming up in places like Aberdeen as well, where they're looking at apprenticeships, and they are pulling together industry with organisations like the Offshore Renewables Energy Centre and OGTC to really try and look across at where those skills are required. So collaboration is absolutely key.
Great. Thank you very much, Monica. Graham.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. So this question probably goes to the whole panel. There was a feeling that we are playing catch up on developing the H2 supply chain, where other countries have already taken the lead, similar to the EV market. Any thoughts?
It's a bit like the curate's egg. I think it's good in parts. I don't think we're that far off the mark, really. I mean, Germany obviously is very good. California is very good, but I'm not. I think it's still to play for, and it's a really important point. But I don't think we're. Yeah, we need to keep exercising and develop this. But it's not. I don't think we're by any means off the radar at present.
I was just going to add to that. I agree with John. I don't think we're behind the pace yet. So I think we've demonstrated an awful lot in Scotland, and we are swift to move on these demonstration projects and fund them. We've done quite a lot of that, evidenced over the years. The trick now is to get commercial scale hydrogen production underway. Setting the ambition of the 5 gigawatts, we hope, sends a signal, as I mentioned earlier. That target and that ambition gigawatts, is the same ambition that Germany has, a much bigger country, much more industrialized base, much bigger energy use. So we are already kind of punching above our weight in that way, but obviously we think that we can export a lot of the hydrogen that we produce. So I think the task in front of us now is to keep the pace and momentum going. This is why we've got this £100 million of funding circled to accelerate the hydrogen economy in Scotland in all these different ways. But what it comes down to for me is production and moving that forward at a low cost as we can, and moving that into the production. All the offtakes of hydrogen, you know, it's a complex picture, but it all comes down to two things for me: blue and green hydrogen being produced in Scotland at scale. So this will be a big focus for us, and other countries will be doing the same thing, we think. So it's quite good to be in company, that we're not, you know, going alone. But there is a feeling of competition coming up for the export of hydrogen with other countries, to be honest. So, but I think we're on track at the moment. We're you know, there's more to be done, obviously.
I think that's probably back to you then, Jerry.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Graham. So this one's quite a specific and technical one. I'm not sure who to pass it to, so I'll leave it to on a voluntary basis. How suitable is Scotland for geological storage? Go for it, Stuart.
Well, I'll defer to John's academic experience, but from the way I sit across a lot of these things, my view is we don't know yet. So we don't have access to salt caverns, which is the traditional way to store hydrogen geologically. We don't really have that in our geology. We have it quite close by in Northern Ireland, actually, which isn't that far away, something to keep in mind. But there is some work, the high store pore work that Veronica mentioned earlier, is looking at the geological suitability of hydrogen. And when that report is done, I think we'll have a good baseline. But I'm not quite sure, Veronica, when is that ready to be finished? Or John, do you know?
No.
This is
Not entirely sure about when it's due to be finished, Stuart. It's coming up with some pretty good results, though. It's you know, beginning to conclude that there are some good sort of oil and gas seams for geological storage that could be used, and there's plenty of those. But I think it's still mid-research. I think there's still a few months to go on it.
Okay, and not to forget that we have the option of line packing as an intermediate option, and also perhaps the repurposing of oil and gas pipelines.
John, did you want to add anything? And perhaps should we widen it out to other geographical assets within Scotland that are suited for storage?
Yeah, well, when we've got the right people to answer the question in terms of Stuart Hazeldine and the team in Edinburgh. Somebody said, Snae said high store. Oh yeah, Edinburgh University. But yeah, Edinburgh are the right people to answer that question now. My feeling is the answer is yes, we do, but I can tell you what the crystal structure of the rock is, but I can't tell you about its geology. It's not in my pay grade. Okay. But there's a lot of options for storing in using the oil and gas. I mean, the Norwegian projects I mentioned, that they're looking to use the technology they've developed for handling oil and gas, for storing gas under subsea. So in pipes and vessels on subsea, and there are some small companies developing hydrogen storage tanks, around which I would like to see some SMEs that I see brought more into the picture.
Okay.
So the answer, Jerry, is that there's work underway to find that out. Yeah. So we realise that it's something we need to know about. And Stuart Hazeldine, Professor Hazeldine's team at Edinburgh University are the very people to take that forward, which they are.
Right. Thank you very much.
Can I just add there that there is a perception that Scotland doesn't have that storage capacity, but that study is finding that offshore UK gas fields with direct pipeline connections to UK gas terminals can potentially store quite a lot of hydrogen. So I think we'll be seeing that information coming out. It does look, so it's really quite positive, a positive picture, which is, you know, the North Sea providing an opportunity for the UK to become a net exporter of low carbon hydrogen.
Great. Thank you very much, Monica. Graham.
Thanks, Jerry. So I think the next question is a really important one. What's the strategy for public engagement? I guess John mentioned a little bit about public engagement, so I'll probably go to him first.
Right. Well, COP26 is going to be a big opportunity. So you know, the hydrogen train that's being developed at Bowness will be you know, should be a really high profile activity for Scotland. We're doing it all the time. There's an industry club shortly after that the accelerator is running. Maybe, and the Hydrogen Accelerator is looking to develop strategies for public engagement around transport, but it's very much doing stuff and having it seen. I mean, obviously Aberdeen has done fantastic work, you know, globally leading with their bus rollout, and I like to talk about kicking the tires. At least in buses, that's okay. Maybe not in trains. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, John. So public engagement is going to be a key part of our action plan, because it's really important that we engage the public in hydrogen to explain what it is and what it isn't as well. We can't underestimate the impact of people being frightened of things that they don't know. So I think we need to really address that issue face on. The first part of that in Scotland for us, the biggest, the first big step will be the H100 project. So the H100 project is the 100% hydrogen heat network in Fife. As part of that project remit, there will be quite a big public engagement programme. There'll also be not a demonstration, but an exhibition house developed, probably by the end of this year, as the first place where the hydrogen appliances will be, and it will be open to the public and you know, schools, etc., and things like that, to come and visit and see hydrogen working in a domestic setting. That will be an important outreach. We're also planning to do, as I said in the action plan, quite a big, you know, part of our plan will be, you know, programs of outreach, just to try and raise awareness, to be honest. The example in Aberdeen seems to have worked quite well, where people recognise the hydrogen buses and use them and seem to like them. So that's a positive. In Orkney, there really is a hydrogen educated community there. I recently, well, before lockdown, went along to Orkney, been there a few times, and I always tell the story of the taxi driver who brought me to the airport, who said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work in hydrogen for the Scottish Government." And he said, "Yep, hydrogen's the way forward, you know, for these." And he started telling me all this stuff about hydrogen. And he was the taxi driver to the airport, and I thought, this community is, you know, has been, you know, exposed to hydrogen and accepted it, and it's quite a good example of how that has worked over the years. So we need to do a similar exercise, you know, in a more kind of nationwide approach.
Thanks, Stuart. I think Fiona had a point you'd like to raise.
Yes, if you don't mind, thank you very much. I shouldn't really be coming in, but I am. Just on the train project, there is an actual dedicated piece of work around community engagement. So our Coal of Energy are actually leading on that, where we will be working with the 7 cities and with the schools, actually creating Lego hydrogen trains, all part of that educational process, but also real strategy from Glasgow City Council, looking at that public engagement right through COP. But part of all the projects that we're developing across the cities and regions, there's going to be that public engagement, which is absolutely pivotal to dispel the myths and really, and just say educate, that sounds patronising, but to really to let citizens actually understand what we're actually doing, because that's so important to get those really positive messages out there as well. And Stuart's right, Aberdeen buses, people used to wait to get on the hydrogen bus when it's coming through rather than the fossil bus. So, you know, times are changing, yeah. But going to the schools particularly is, I think, is a really key initiative as well, educating the young. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's over to you, Jerry.
Great, thanks, Graham. So the next one's a bit trickier, and I think has to go to Stuart first. Do you feel 100 million investment over 5 years is competitive, given how much investment is being provided by Germany and France?
If you look at what Germany are doing, Germany and France are doing different things. So they've developed a national hydrogen strategy with huge amounts of money. We don't have that, obviously, but we're picking a strategy that suits Scotland. So the strategy that suits Germany is different from the strategy that suits Scotland. Germany is a much bigger economy, a much bigger country. And the way that it's tackling its hydrogen development is in industry. So they've chosen industrial uses of hydrogen as the way that they will focus this. So they're very clear about what they want to do, and they have, you know, appropriately funded that. France is a bit different again. So France has quite a big nuclear fleet, as you know, and you know, hydrogen from nuclear is called yellow hydrogen. And that's a key feature of their strategy going forward too. So we've got a different strategy which is focused to the resources that we have, which are oil and gas skills, the production of gas and methane, using that to produce blue hydrogen, and offshore wind. So we're trying to tie hydrogen to all these things. But I think 100 million is a significant amount of money for Scotland and for what we need to do in the next 5 years. And just to bear in mind that that is a 5-year programme, and we'll have to continue to develop that going forward as well.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Pass you back to you, Graham. Now, so we can...
Thanks, Jerry. Do you see a role for small-scale hydrogen production and the development perhaps of fleets or off-grid scenarios? I guess that goes to the whole panel, I think, that one.
Yeah, it sounds, looking at distributed transport, any sort of hydrogen refueling, it's quite likely to run off 1 or 2 megawatts. So, yeah, absolutely.
I think the interesting thing is this is what we're seeing now, you know, is the distributed decentralized small-scale hydrogen production. So yeah, absolutely. I think we partly answered this question earlier on as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think that's true, Graham. I think that small green will be first, then maybe a large blue, then large green. In the timeline, in my mind, that's the way these things develop.
Okay. Back to you, Jerry.
Great. This might have to be the last question, I suspect, because we're getting a bit close to the end here, but it's a good one. What are the top 5 barriers or gaps to us achieving our strategic ambition to become an exporter, as in scenario 3? And where can the research community best invest its efforts? Now, where do we start with that then? John, did you want to open on that one?
I guess cost of production is the key thing. So, you know, getting scale, making it more efficient. It's to be a major exporter, you've got to produce at less than 2 pounds a kilogram. So the research challenge is biggest research challenge is to address the production, make it more efficient. There are lots of things tied in with that, into that as well, like storage and pressurization. I think we've got the renewables, so the renewables are on stream. So it's getting from the electrons to the hydrogen, and then I guess another barrier might be what the vehicle is. So is it production of ammonia or organic carrier, or perhaps methanol? Depends. That will depend a little bit on the users.
Great, thank you, John. I was going to suggest that we then maybe touch on the supply chain aspects of that question, Veronica, and then finish off with Stuart maybe. So how do you see the gaps playing out in the supply chain there, Veronica? Are there particular areas that industry is looking for that researchers can support, that you're hearing from the supply chain community?
I think that it's across the range of different areas that will contribute to this sector. So offshore renewables as well as onshore renewables are going to be key. Floating wind is going to be key, but we need to get the costs down. We need to look at substructures there. We need to look at foundations. There's a whole range of areas where we have strengths, but we need to innovate on them to reduce the costs overall. Again, in energy storage, there is a requirement to have potentially really quite large storage. What kind of storage should that be? How should it actually operate? Going back to the geological question, there's conclusions to be reached there. And in terms of the network infrastructure, there are a number of things that we have. We've got the HDVC Centre. We've got the need for better cabling, for instance, for offshore wind, if that's actually going to become big and make a good contribution here. So there's a whole range of things that we are seeing already that need to be addressed. I think we do need to do more work on the supply chain. We are still mapping it. And from that point, we'll be engaging with potential suppliers and trying to develop support programs around it, such as, we've been running an expert support for oil and gas into offshore wind for a couple of years, really quite a successful model that actually helps companies to understand where the gaps and challenges are, but also academia, so that we can collectively try and address them.
Great, thank you very much, Veronica. Would you like to add anything to that to finish off there, Stuart, about the vision of Scotland as an exporter?
Yes, thanks, Jerry. I agree with what John and Veronica have said. The other things that we need to do, there are more than 5 actually, but the other things we need to do is raise awareness of Scotland as a potential exporter. So when people in Europe, countries in Europe, think of where they're going to buy hydrogen from, I don't think they automatically think of Scotland. So we need to change that view, and we're doing quite a lot of international collaboration through our Berlin office and through our Brussels and Paris hubs as well, raising the prospect of importing hydrogen from Scotland and viewing Scotland as a place where that can happen. And making them aware of our policy statement. This has also been quite a lot of ministerial engagement as well over the past wee while, and I think it will continue through the year. The cost of production is key, just as John said. Cost of production is a key focus. Integration of the systems needs to happen. It's not an easy thing. So offshore wind and onshore wind integrating into hydrogen production, we need to understand the interface there and the smart systems to make that work. They're not readily available, and we need to look at that. From the policy side, we'll look at the regulatory stuff and the policy framework and financial instruments and things too with the UK government. But what we need to do as well is just look at the demand side. So a lot of the projects that come across my desk are about supply of hydrogen. We need to also look at the demand and find out who are the buyers of hydrogen in the future. Where are they? How much do they want to buy? Why do they want to buy it? And this is where we start to provide this hydrogen value chain. So quite a long-winded answer, sorry, but I am thinking about this a lot, so it's in my mind. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That's very useful. I think we're at the end of this. So, Graham, did you want to say anything as part of closing out the session?
No, I think in the interest of time, we'd probably best move on. I think. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you very much to the panelists. So I think Fiona's next. I think on the agenda. Do we go back to Stephen Mark first? Maybe Fiona, if you could just go ahead and close the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Firstly, can I just thank all the attendees for contributing this morning, and to our speakers and the panelists, and also the organisers, SNE and ETP. So thanks very much. Just a bit introduce myself. I'm the delivery manager for the Hydrogen Accelerator. So I've been working in the hydrogen sector about 9 years, leading on kickstarting the hydrogen economy across the 7 cities in particular for about 6.5 of those years. And we've seen over recent years the real acceleration of the uptake and interest in the hydrogen sector. But what we need to do right now is we've done the novel projects, we've really got to scale up. So that's one of the key messages that we need to focus on, because otherwise we're not going to reach our ambitions if we don't. We're too slow to get projects off the ground, and so that's something that we need to change. And I think very much having the Hydrogen Accelerator to be that enabler where we can really support the public sector in particular, who are naturally very quite risk averse to these technologies, and how we can actually really support them by building up models that can be replicated right across cities and regions. Particularly, obviously, we're focused very much on the transport sector, to really make sure that we are supporting them to achieve what they need to do for their own cities and regions. Procurement is another area that we really need to look at, and that's something that part of the Hydrogen Accelerator will focus on. But looking right across the hydrogen sector, as John said, the hydrogen is an enabler, and very much academia is such an important part of that whole how would you describe it, the whole system approach to how we move into this decarbonisation and reach these challenges. I think collaboration is absolutely key for both public and private sectors. I think looking at a pipeline of investable opportunities for the private sector to actually get our narrative correct, and to actually have that scale there, that when the investors are looking for opportunities, they can really look at Scotland and actually identify exactly key areas that they would consider investing in. So I think that's just a number of the areas that I can see are going to be so important as we move forward in the hydrogen sector. It's all there to play for, and I just think if we can just get that pace up now, and us all working together, we can absolutely reach our targets in terms of decarbonisation and export potential, and creating those really high value jobs as well. I think that's about me. Thank you.
Okay, so shall I just close up then?
Yeah.
So just thank you to everybody. Thanks from ETP, Hydrogen Accelerator. We'll be open for any questions, comments and so on. The presentations will be made available soon. I think there is a transcript of the questions, so we'll be looking through those and seeing if we can answer them directly. But finally, just thank you for everybody. Thanks for coming along, and watch this space, and goodbye.